Good day, I'm Maureen S. Villanueva.
I'm Trisha Macy Prades.
Today, we're going to tell the adventures of Aeneas. Specifically, I, together with Miss Prades, would be narrating the first part of the Trojan hero's adventures from Troy to Italy. Aeneas was one of the most famous heroes who fought the Trojan War. On the Trojan side, he was second only to Hector. He was a demigod, for he was the son of Venus, who was the Roman counterpart of the Greek goddess Aphrodite. When the Greeks seized Troy, Aeneas was able to escape from the city with his father and his little son, and to sail away to a new home through his mother's help. Aeneas arrived in Italy after a long journey and numerous challenges on land and sea, where he fought those who resisted his entry, married the daughter of a great king, and established a city. Aeneas was always regarded to be the real founder of Rome because the actual founders, Romulus and Remus, were born in the city his son founded, Alba Longa. Many Trojans had joined him when Aeneas set sail from Troy. Everyone was eager to find a place to call home, but no one knew where that should be. Several times they started to build a city, but they were always driven away by misfortunes or bad omens. Finally, Aeneas was instructed in a dream that they were destined for a country far to the west, Italy, which was then known as Hesperia, or the Western country. They were then on the island of Crete, and although the promised land was distant by a long voyage over unknown seas, they were thankful for the assurance that they would someday have their own home, and they started at once on their journey. Before they reached their desired haven, however, a long time passed, and much happened, which if they had known beforehand might have checked their eagerness. Despite the fact that Aeneas' company went west from Crete, and the Argonauts traveled east from Greece, the Trojans encountered the Harpies in the same way that Jason and the Argonauts did. However, the Greek heroes were more daring or had superior swordsmanship. They were about to slaughter the monstrous animals when Eris intervened. But the Trojans were chased away by them and forced to sail out to sea to avoid them. Much to their surprise, they met Hector's wife Andromache at their next landing spot. When Troy fell, she was entrusted to Achilles' son 𝑇𝑖𝑚𝑒𝑙𝑒𝑠, also known as Pyrrhus, who had killed old Priam at the altar. He soon left her for Helen's daughter Hermione, but this marriage didn't last long, and Andromache married the Trojan prophet Helenus after Pyrrhus died. They were now ruling the country and of course were rejoiced to welcome Aeneas and his men. They entertained them with hospitality, and before bidding them farewell, Helenus provided them with helpful travel advice. He warned them not to land on the nearest Italian coast, the east coast, because it was occupied by Greeks. Their destination was just north of the west coast, but the shortest route should not go up between Sicily and Italy. In these areas are the most dangerous straits protected by Scylla and Charybdis, where Argonauts were only able to pass through because Thetis helped them, and where Ulysses, the Latin counterpart of Odysseus, lost 6 men. It is unclear how the Argonauts or even Ulysses got toward the west bank of Italy on their way from Asia to Greece. Yet, there was no doubt as far as Helenus can say where the waterway was, and he gave Aeneas explicit directions on the most proficient method to keep away from those nuisances to sailors. By making a long circuit toward the south around Sicily, and arriving at Italy far toward the north of the whirlpool of unyielding Charybdis, and the black cavern into which Scylla sacked whole ships. After saying their goodbyes to their gracious hosts, and safely rounding the eastern edge of Italy, the Trojans continued southwestward around Sicily, confident in their prophetic guide. Apparently, however, for all his mysterious powers, Helenus was not aware that Sicily, at least the southern part, was now occupied by the Cyclopes, for he did not warn the Trojans against landing there. They reached the island after sunset and made camp on the shore with no hesitation at all. If the miserable misery of a man had not come running to where Aeneas was sleeping very early the next morning before any of the monsters were awake, they would almost certainly have all been abducted and eaten. His face was squalid in the extreme, with a thick growth of hair, and his obvious agony was enough of an appeal. His pallor like that of one half dead from starvation, his clothes held together only by thorns. He informed them that he was one of Ulysses' sailors who had been left behind unintentionally in Polyphemus' cave and had since lived in the woods on whatever he could find there, frightened of being discovered by one of the Cyclopes. He claimed that there were 100 of them, each as large and terrifying as Polyphemus. He urged the Trojans to flee, and they did as he said, cutting the cables and making as little noise as possible. They were able to escape that danger, but they were soon confronted with another. While rounding Sicily, they were struck by a storm that was evidently more than just a mortal disaster, and Juno, the Roman counterpart of Greek goddess Hera, was behind it. She hated all Trojans, of course. She never forgot the judgment of Paris, and she had been Troy's bitterest enemy during the war. But she felt an especial hatred for Aeneas. She was well aware that Rome, which was to be created by men of Trojan blood years after Aeneas, was destined by the fates to conquer Carthage at some point, and Carthage was her favorite city, treasured above all others on earth. It's unclear whether Hera truly believed that she could defy the fates' decrees, which Jupiter or Zeus himself couldn't do, but she certainly tried to drown Aeneas. Hera went to Aeolus, the king of the winds, who tried to help Odysseus, and asked him to sink a Trojan ship, and in return promised him the most beautiful nymph. The result was a violent storm. Without Neptune, the Roman counterpart of Greek god Poseidon, Juno would have done everything she wanted. As a brother of Juno, he knew her way well, and it did not suit him that she interfered with his sea. But he paid attention to her as Jupiter always did. He didn't say a word to her but contented himself with sending a stern reprimand to Aeolus. Then he calmed the sea and allowed the Trojans to land. The Trojans finally landed on the north coast of Africa on their ship. They had been blown away from Sicily all the time. The place they landed happened to be very close to Carthage, and Juno soon began to think of ways to turn this arrival into the Trojans' disadvantages and the Carthaginians' advantages. Carthage had been established by a woman, Dido, who was still its ruler and under whom it was growing into a great and splendid city. Juno's plan was to have the two fall in love with each other, and so divert Aeneas from Italy and induce him to settle down with Dido. If it hadn't been for Venus, it would have been a good strategy. She knew what was going on in Juno's head and was determined to stop it. She had her own strategy in mind. Venus was quite willing to have Dido fall in love with Aeneas, so that no harm could come to her son in Carthage. But she intended to see to it that his feelings for Dido should be no more than an entire willingness to take anything she wanted to give, by no means such as to interfere in the least with his sailing away to Italy whenever that seemed best. As for Aeneas and his company's adventures in Carthage, here is Miss Tricia Macy Prades.
Thank you, Miss Villanueva. At this juncture, she went up to Olympus to talk to Jupiter. Jupiter approached her and found the one who had eyes full of tears. She said, I, the king of gods and men, promised that Aeneas should be the ancestor of a race that eventually will rule the world. However, Aeneas was now messed up. Jupiter consoles her and kisses her tears away. He told her that it will happen and Aeneas' descendants would be the Romans, to whom the fates had decreed a boundless and endless empire. Venus left there at ease, but as an assurance, she asked for Cupid's help to make Dido, a powerful queen whom can help Aeneas regain his name, fall in love with her son. However, Dido was delicate. All the kings had tried to persuade her, but none of them succeeded. So Venus summoned Cupid, who promised that he would set Dido's heart on fire with love as soon as she laid eyes on Aeneas. The morning after they landed, Aeneas with his friend, the faithful Achates, left his wretched shipwreck followers to try to find out what part of the world they were in. He spoke cheering words to them before he started. The heroes explored the strange country, while Venus, disguised as a huntress, appeared to them. She purposely advised them to go straight to Carthage, whose queen would surely help them. With that, they took the way which Venus pointed. They were unconsciously protected by a thick mist Venus wrapped around them to avoid interference. Before a great temple, they paused, wondering how they could get to the queen. And there, new hope came to them. As they gazed at the splendid building they saw marvelously carved upon the walls, the battles around Troy in which they themselves had taken part. And that Aeneas took as his cue and said, "I take courage." At that moment, Dido, lovely as Diana herself, approached with a great train of attendants. Aeneas was revealed when the mist around him dissolved and stand beautifully as Apollo. When the queen known his name, she received him and his company with welcoming arms, as she knew how it feels to be in that position, for she herself had come to Africa with a few friends fleeing from her brother who wanted to murder her. She gave a splendid banquet for the strangers that night, at which Aeneas told their story, the fall of Troy first, and then their long journeying. He spoke admirably that Dido would have been captured even if there had no God in the case. But as it was, Cupid was there and she had no choice. Dido was happy, with Aeneas seemed devoted to her, and she, for her part, gave everything Aeneas needs, even the city she ruled. He, a poor shipwrecked man, had equal honor with her. She made the Carthaginians treat him as if he too were the ruler. His companions as well were distinguished by his favor. Dido did all this nothing but only for Aeneas' love. On his side, he received what her generosity bestowed with great contentment. He lived at his ease with a beautiful woman and a powerful queen to love him and provide him everything for him and beg him to tell over and over again the tale of his adventures. Sailing is now the least priority for Aeneas, and Juno was very well satisfied with it. But even so, Venus was quite undisturbed. She knew Jupiter very well. She was sure that he would make Aeneas in the end go to Italy, and she was quite right. Jupiter dispatched Mercury to Carthage with a message for Aeneas. The god found the hero walking about dressed to admiration, with a superb sword and over his shoulders a beautiful cloak, that all Dido's work of her own hands. Suddenly, this elegant gentleman was startled out of his contentment. Stern words sounded in his ear. "How long are you going to waste time here in idle luxury?" a severe voice asked. He turned, and Mercury, visibly the god, stood before him. "The ruler of heaven himself has sent me to you," he said. "He bids you depart and seek the kingdom which is your destiny." With that, he vanished into the air, leaving Aeneas excited and determined to obey, but unknowingly how very difficult it was going to be with Dido. He called his men together and ordered them to prepare for immediate and secret departure. Nevertheless, Dido learned, and she sent for him. She was very gentle with him at first. She could not believe that he really meant to leave her. "Is it from me you would fly?" she asked. "Let these tears plead for me. This hand I gave to you. If I have in any way deserved well of you, if anything of mine was ever sweet to you." Aeneas answered that he will never forget her kindness, but she must remember that he had not married her and was free to leave her whenever he chose. Jupiter had ordered him to go, and he must obey. "Cease these complaints," he begged her, "which only trouble us both." Dido pulled her last string by stating all that she had done for him, but it was useless since Aeneas was so determined, and so she fled from him and hid herself where no one could see her. The Trojans sailed that night. One word from the queen and their departure would have been forever impossible. On shipboard, looking back at the walls of Carthage, Aeneas saw them illuminated by a great fire. He watched the flames leap up and slowly die down, and he wondered what the cause was. Unknowingly, he was looking at the glow of Dido's funeral pyre. When she saw that he was gone, she killed herself.
Thank you, ma'am. I am May Assistant for the continuation of Adventure of Aeneas. Let's proceed to the second part of the story, the descent into a lower world. Please excuse my voice cause I'm having a cough and sore throat. In comparison to what had come before, the trek from Carthage to the west coast of Italy was simple. The death of the reliable pilot Palinurus, who perished as they neared the end of their perils at sea, was a huge loss. As soon as Aeneas arrived in Italy, the prophet Helenus advised him to seek out the cave of a Sibyl of Cumae, a wise lady who could prophesy the future and counsel him on what to do. Nevertheless, if he was determined, she would go with him. First, he must find a golden bough growing on a tree and take it to her. He was accompanied by Achates. They caught sight of 2 doves and birds of Venus. At the lake of Avernus, a dark, foul-smelling sheet of water had emerged. The doves soared a few of foliage came a bright yellow gleam. It was the golden bough. Aeneas joyously plucked it and presented it to Sibyl. The prophetess and hero then embarked on their journey together. It had been taken by other heroes before Aeneas, and they had not found it particularly terrible. Indeed, the purple Psyche had gone there alone to obtain the Venus beauty charm from the Serpine, and had encountered nothing worse than a 3-headed dog Cerberus, who had been readily placated with a piece of cake. The Sibyls killed 4 coal-black bullocks to Hecate, the terrifying goddess of night. In the dead night in front of the dark grotto on the side of the bleak lake, the earth trembled and quaked beneath their feet. As she set the sacrifice part on the blazing altar, the dogs howled through the darkness from afar. "Now, will you need all your courage?" she said to Aeneas as she dashed into the cave and he followed her unfazed. They passed through them unharmed and eventually arrived at the location where an elderly guy was rowing a boat across a body of water. They beheld a sorrowful sight, ghosts on the coast as numerous as the leaves that fall in the forest before the first frost of winter, all extending out their hands and pleading with the ferryman to carry them across to the far bank. But the gloomy old guy made his own choice among them, admitting some and pushing others away from his boat. As Aeneas gazed in awe, and Sibyl informed him that they arrived at the confluence of 2 huge rivers in the underworld, the Cocytus and the Acheron. Charon was the ferryman, and those he wouldn't let on board were the unfortunates who haven't been properly buried. When Aeneas and his guide arrived at the boat, Charon was tempted to refuse them. He instructed them to come to a halt and said he only transported the dead. However, when he saw the golden bough, he gave in and carried them across. They continued on until they arrived at the solemn location where Minos, Europa's son and the uncompromising judge of the dead, was handing down his final judgment on the soul before him. They hurried away from that inescapable presence and ended themselves at the fields of mourning, where Aeneas gets sight of Dido in a sad yet charming area surrounded by myrtle groves. As he met her, he sobbed. "Was it my fault that you died?" he inquired. She didn't look at him or respond when he said, "I swore, I left you against my will." It was impossible for a chunk of marble to appear unmoved. He, on the other hand, was deeply frightened and continued to cry for a long time. Finally, they arrived at a fork in the road. The sounds of groans, fierce blows, and chain clanking came from the left branch. She claimed that stern Rhadamanthus, another son of Europa, ruled the territories to the left, punishing the wicked for their transgressions. The road on the other side, however, went to Aeneas' father in Elysian fields. Everything was magnificent. When they came, soft green meadows, lovely woods, a delicious life-giving air, softly purple sunlight, an abode of serenity and blessing. Aeneas quickly came across Anchises, who greeted him with astonishment at this unexpected reunion between the dead and the living, whose love had been powerful enough to carry him down to the world of the dead, both father and son shed joyous tears. Anchises took Aeneas to Lethe, the river of forgetfulness. Finally, he instructed his son on how to best create his home in Italy and how to avoid or withstand all of the challenges that lied ahead of him. Then they parted calmly, knowing that they were only going to be apart for a short time. Aeneas and the Sibyl returned to earth, and Aeneas went back to his ships. The Trojans sailed up the coast of Italy the next day in search of their promised abode. I'll wrap up my report here. May I call Sir Dave Jefferson Pagbilao for the part 3 of the Adventures of Aeneas.
Thank you, Ma'am May. I am Dave Jefferson D. Pagbilao, and the scope of my report will be half of the part 3 of the Adventure of Aeneas, which is the war in Italy. After ascending back to the land of the living and had reached the city of Italy, the Trojans' journey to their promised home would be a lot easier if not to Juno's unceasing anger towards the people of Troy, especially to Aeneas. As a result, the goddess fuels the war between the Latins and the Rutulians against the Trojans. This particular war initially started when King Latinus, the aged ruler of the city of Latium, decided to marry his only daughter Lavinia to Aeneas upon their arrival in the country, because it was said in the prophecy that the king's daughter should not be married to any native citizen of the land but only to a foreigner. And the king believed that it was Aeneas who was destined to marry his daughter Lavinia. However, the goddess Juno does not allow such fortune to come to the Trojans. Hence, she summoned Alecto, one of the Furies from the underworld who inflict punishments to the sinners, to help her bring sufferings to Aeneas and his men. The creature then willingly took the command of the goddess, and the first thing it did was made Queen Amata, the wife of King Latinus, opposed to the marriage of her daughter and the stranger man. The queen then went to Turnus, the king of Rhetorians and the most adamant suitor of Princess Lavinia, to convey the news about the marriage. And after hearing this news, King Turnus immediately sailed towards the city of Latium to stop the marriage. To make things even worse, Alecto also made Ascanius, the son of Aeneas, shot to death the stag, which is very sacred to all Latins. Thereafter, Alecto immediately spread the news to all the citizens of the Latium, which fueled their hatred towards the Trojans. By then, King Turnus and his men reached the city and had also decided to join in the battle. Before the war starts, it was the tradition of the Latins that the temple of the god Janus should be kept closed at times of peace and should be opened by the king when the country was in war. However, the king was locked inside the palace and was occupied with what is happening, so he doesn't have the time to open the gate. Thus, Juno, the goddess herself, flung the gate open, and the battle between the Latins and Rhetorians against Trojans began. King Turnus, ruler of the Rhetorians, led the war along with his great men, one of which was Mezentius, a great warrior and a former ruler of Etruscan, but was thrown away by his own people due to his cruelty. Another one was Camilla, who is a fierce mistress of war. In the middle of the bloody dispute between two opposing sides, Father Tiber, god of the great river near the battlefield, appears to Aeneas' dreams and orders him to go and seek advice to Evander, the ruler of the underprivileged town residing across the river of Tiber, in which were the towering country of Rome was destined to rise. Thereafter, Aeneas, along a few of his men, went afloat in the river to follow the river god's order. As they reached Evander's land, he was accepted by the king and his son, Pallas, with utmost hospitality. The king introduces Aeneas and his men to the town and narrate how he came to this land as they lead their guests to the crude buildings. The Trojans spent the night there, and when morning came, King Evander and Aeneas talked about the matter. The king told them that his small country, which he called Arcady, has no help to offer the Trojans, but he advised them to go to Etruscans instead, former people led by Mezentius, who now helped Turnus in the battle. The Etruscans hated their former ruler Mezentius because of his unbearable cruelty as a leader. He would link the dead and living together until they die in terror and horror, and this alone is enough for the Etruscans to join the Trojans in the battle. For the continuation of this part, I now call the presence of Mr. Peter S. Colonna.
Thank you, Dave. In this portion of the report, I will continue the part 3 of the Adventures of Aeneas. While Aeneas is away, the Trojans did nothing but defend themselves from Turnus' attack. They were greatly outnumbered. The prospect was dark unless they could get a word to Aeneas what was happening. From the little band, two men named Nisus and Euryalus resolved to try pass through the enemy under cover of the night and reach Aeneas, who is on his way with the Trojan camp's best warriors to reach the Etruscan army and enlist their help. The idea came first to Nisus as he looked over the ramparts at the enemy and observed how few and dim the lights were and how deep a silence reigned as of men fast asleep. He told his plan to his friend Euryalus, but with no thought of his going too. Nisus saw that it is impossible to persuade Euryalus not to come with him and sorrowfully let him tag along. They found the Trojan leaders holding a council, and they presented their plan to them. Their proposal was immediately accepted, and the princes with choked voices and falling tears expressed their gratitude and promised them rich rewards. "I want only one," said Euryalus. "My mother is here in the camp. She would not stay behind with the other women. She would follow me. I am all she has. If I die, she will be my mother," Ascanius broke in. "She shall have the place of the mother I lost that last night in Troy. I swear it to you, and take this with you, my own sword. It will not fail you," he added. The two then proceeded through trench to the enemy's camp. Men were sleeping all around. "I am going to clear a path for us," Nisus told to Euryalus in a soft voice. With that, he killed man after man so expertly that none of them made a sound as they died. Euryalus soon joined in the bloody work. When they got to the end of the camp, they had cleared a large highway through it, where only dead men lay. They had, however, made a mistake by delaying. Morning was coming. A troop of horses marching from Latium saw the shining helmet of Euryalus and challenged him. When Euryalus got into the trees without answering, they knew he was an enemy, and they enclosed the wood. In their hurry, they got separated and Euryalus took the wrong path. Nisus, worried about Euryalus, turned back to find him. Then he saw him in the hands of the enemies. He was alone, feeling hopeless, yet for him, it was better to try saving him and die than leave his friend. He battled them, him against a whole troop, and managed to take down a number of warriors with his spear. The leader, who had no idea where the attack was coming from, turned upon Euryalus, shouting, "You shall pay for this!" Before he could strike him with his sword, Nisus showed himself. "Kill me! Me!" he cried. He said to the leader that it was his fault, and his friend only followed him. With no words, he stabbed his sword into Euryalus' breast. As he fell dying, Nisus attacked the man who killed his friend. Then, pierced with many darts, he too fell dead beside his friend. The rest of Trojan's adventures were all on the battlefield. Aeneas returned with a huge army of Etruscans in time to save the camp, and a fierce battle raged. From that point on, the plot becomes little more than a story of men butchering each other. Battle follows battle, but they are all the same. Long before the conclusion of the battle, the horrors have ceased to horrify. Every one of the Trojans' foes is killed. Camilla perished, and the mischievous Mezentius meets the destiny he deserves, but only after his son is killed defending him. Many good allies meet their end as well, and one of them is Pallas. At long last, Turnus and Aeneas meet in a single combat. By this point, Aeneas, who in the earlier part of the story seemed human, had transformed into something strange and portentous. When he faces Turnus in the last battle, there is no interest in the outcome. Fighting Aeneas is as futile for Turnus as fighting lightning or an earthquake. After the battle, Aeneas married Lavinia and founded the Roman race. That's all for the Adventures of Aeneas. Thank you for your time.